Hi, Acadiana. I'm Meteorologist Dave Baker. Happy Monday to you. Got a lot going on here in Let's Talk Tropics. If you've been trying to follow along with Hurricane Milton, we've seen some tremendous changes just in the last 48 hours. When we left you on Friday, models were indicating a close center of low pressure, maybe something moving across the southern Gulf of Mexico, but we have seen unprecedented strengthening with this particular system. It became a tropical depression on Saturday morning and then went up to a Category 5 hurricane at last check here when we got an update from the National Hurricane Center right before 11 o'clock. We've seen some significant drops in the pressure, about twice what the normal what the definition basically is of rapid intensification with the pressure drop, and kind of the same thing going with the winds. Now, the column there on the left with Milton, that is the latest coordinates, the latest wind speeds, and also the latest pressure. Now that may be changing because we've seen several changes because we're getting data basically in real time from the reconnaissance aircraft coming in. So you will see some graphics that have some outdated information, particularly the numbers on the bottom, because they're just kind of they're updating the numbers there with the lat long winds and pressure, but some of the graphics do not get updated until we get to about 1 o'clock. So you will see some a little bit of discrepancies there, but I'll try to point those out as we go through this forecast here in the next 15 to 20 minutes or so. Right now, we've got a really pretty day here in Lafayette and much of Acadiana, looking at mostly sunny skies. Our temperature now at 87 and our heat index around 89. That dew point is going to be dropping and those winds are going to be gusting more out of the north. So as those dew points continue to drop off, I think our temperatures are easily going to drop into the low to mid 60s tonight with some upper 50s north, and I think everybody will get into the 50s as we head into tomorrow night. And as you can see, the skies are gorgeous out there, not a cloud in the sky. Beautiful afternoon here in Acadiana, and I think it's going to stay that way. No rain on the radar, even with a frontal boundary kind of approaching the area. So let's go ahead and get right into it and look at the national picture. Of course, you can see Hurricane Milton down in the southern part of the Gulf of Mexico. And as I said, on Saturday morning, it was right about in here, and it became a tropical depression. And within, I don't know, maybe an hour or so, they gave it a name, Milton, and then over the last 48 hours, it's basically gone from a 40-mile-per-hour tropical storm to a Category 5 hurricane with winds of 160 miles per hour. And as we look a little closer there, now there's some good news and bad news here. Bad news is obviously that it's a Category 5 hurricane, but for our friends that are down there near the Yucatan Peninsula, this particular hurricane is very, very small. Now, the eye of the hurricane is only about 15 miles wide, and the tropical storm force winds go out about 70 miles, but the hurricane force winds only go out about 25 miles. So the eye of the hurricane is going to have to come within about 25 to 30 miles of the coast for the Yucatan Peninsula to be experiencing hurricane force winds. But there are hurricane warnings that are up now for that northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula, as it is going to be coming very, very close. And at the same time, it's been kind of shoving its way just a little bit south of due east. And I will tell you, when we start to look at some of the models, I've basically thrown out all of the global models, because even the new runs that have come down here just in the past few minutes are already starting Hurricane Milton with an air pressure that is way higher than what it actually is. So we really can't depend on any of the global models. And to tell you the truth, it's going to be hard to depend on some of the hurricane-specific models, even though yesterday when I did a special edition of Let's Talk Tropics, there were a couple of models that were dropping this down below 920 millibars as it moved near the Yucatan Peninsula. So we're kind of in that ball game right now, and something to continue to watch. But there is the latest track. Again, this is one of those times where the information is going to be different on the bottom of the graphic compared to what you see on the left-hand side of your screen. Because this is the 10 o'clock advisory, that is the current cone. And a new cone isn't going to be coming out until 4 o'clock later this afternoon. But the coordinates that you see over on the left-hand side of your screen, those are current. So you want to pay attention to these numbers over here, not those numbers down there at the bottom. So as we look at the cone, you can see this is going to be grazing just the tip of the northern coast of the Yucatan Peninsula. So the hurricane warnings are up there now, because even though the hurricane winds are really concentrated right around the center of circulation, circulation, the eye might get close enough to the coast where we could experience hurricane force winds. And then beyond that, it's going to continue to stay a major hurricane, although there are some indications that it will weaken and not make landfall as a Category 5 in Florida. There's a little wind shear that's going to mess with it. There's also some a little colder waters, maybe some fresh water that's left over from Hurricane Helene, but it's hard to see this when you see the Sunshine State getting hit with another major hurricane in a matter of just 2 weeks. And of course, we all know what that's like here in Louisiana. 2005 was a big year when we had Hurricanes Katrina as well as Rita. And I also wanted to point out that this is our second Category 5 hurricane of the season. Remember Beryl, way in the beginning of the season, it was the earliest Category 5 on record, but there's only been 5 other years where we have seen Category 5, 2 or more Category 5 hurricanes, and 4 of those previous years have been within the last 20 years. 1961, we had Esther and Hattie. 2005, it was Emily, Katrina, Rita, and William. 2007, Dean and Felix. 2017, Irma and Maria, and 2019 was Dorian and Lorenzo. And so far here in 2024, we have already seen Hurricane Beryl as a Category 5 hurricane. So it is, you are watching history happening here right before your eyes. There are the latest forecast model tracks. And again, the model tracks probably aren't going to change a whole lot other than if the initial position changes, because we have had some recon fixes on the center of circulation that have been a little bit more southerly from where the original fix was positioned at. So we have seen a little bit of a southward trend, but you can see almost all of the models are basically making a beeline toward that west central Florida coast, somewhere around Tampa. And then some are kind of scooting their way down to about Fort Myers, and the intensity models have changed a little bit as well. Right now, of course, it is a Category 5 hurricane, but going out about 48 hours, you can see almost all of those models are right there in that solid Category 4. And landfall is going to be somewhere just beyond 48, but before 60 hours. So as you can see, basically all of the models there where the time frame is for landfall is showing a Category 4 hurricane. So that is a little bit higher than what the official National Hurricane Center's forecast is, and I'm sure they're going to be making some adjustments on that as well. Storm surge is going to be a big problem when it comes to this hurricane, because we think that the hurricane is going to grow in size. It's not going to be this tiny little hurricane that it is right now. It's going to grow in size as it gets closer to Florida. And these folks have already been affected by storm surge. When Hurricane Helene came in, it basically ran parallel to the coast before making its way on up toward the Big Bend area. So the water was kind of thrown here along all of these coastlines. And I've seen pictures of, the areas where whatever they lost in flood is sitting out on the curb right now. So you do have a lot of debris that still hasn't been picked up from Hurricane Helene. And we all know it takes a long time to get that, and Hurricane Helene was only a week and a half ago. So with this forecast to make landfall on Wednesday, that would be 2 major hurricanes hitting the state of Florida really within about a 200-mile range there within 2 weeks. So that is something very significant. They have a major evacuation going on, especially there right around Tampa, which is Hillsborough, Pinellas, as well as Manatee counties. And you're also going to see some evacuations on the areas down to the south, Sarasota, pushing down toward Fort Myers, and then getting down even as far south as Naples. Probably we'll see some evacuations there along the coast. And I would believe that there's going to be a lot more people paying attention to this one because of what they experienced from Hurricane Helene a couple of weeks ago. Do you all remember what it was like when there was an evacuation for Katrina, but then a few weeks later when Hurricane Rita came, everybody really paid attention because Hurricane Rita was threatening, and you saw a massive evacuation over southwest Louisiana and much of southeastern Texas. So right now, the closest webcam I have is over in Cancun, and at this point, Cancun kind of faces away from where the hurricane is coming from. This camera more than likely faces off toward the northeast, so things are relatively calm. Again, remember the winds, those hurricane force winds only go out about 25 miles from the center. And in Clearwater Beach, they've been having some rainy days here over the last couple of days, but everything pretty calm right now. And then as you get down toward Fort Myers, again, everything is relatively calm weather-wise there, other than some rain that's falling. But we're going to see some significant changes, especially when it comes to storm surge here coming up over the next couple of days. So let's go with the model data that we have. And I will tell you a lot of this is going to be somewhat undependable. The HWRF, you can see, has it moving just north of the Yucatan Peninsula, but as I'm looking at the pressures there, generally the pressures are still way above what the current situation is. And when we go ahead and stop this here at the very end of that, we can see that we're also seeing quite a bit of wind. As you can see, it's going to be growing a lot more. And at this very last frame here on the HWRF, it's indicating maximum winds just offshore, just north of Tampa. So this one's a little bit farther to the north, but remember, this one came down earlier today. So there's a lot of new information that these models are going to have to absorb. But it is calling for a hurricane of 140 knots. So you're talking about a Category 4, borderline Category 5 at landfall, according to the HWRF. And everything that's shaded in purple here would be hurricane force winds. So after this makes landfall, remember, it's going to be going over the peninsula and moving out into the Atlantic Ocean. This is a high population area where you have Tampa, you have Orlando, and then you have areas along the beaches from Daytona down to Cape Canaveral on the other side of the peninsula. So millions are going to be affected by this. And based on these models, it still looks like it's going to be a very strong hurricane, even as it moves a little bit closer to the coastline. Notice also in the initial frames how small the wind field is as it passes along on the HAFS model. And then the HAFS model actually does bring it in to areas right there along the coast, right around Tampa. Now this, of course, would be a worst case scenario. And again, we're going to stop this here at that final shot. And this is for Wednesday evening. This is about 7 o'clock Wednesday evening. And it's calling for winds at landfall here at 112 knots. So that's a Category 3. So it is still a major hurricane. And remember, everything that's shaded in purple here, this darker purple, is indicating hurricane force winds. So it's got a large wind field that would be affecting areas up towards Cedar Key, which was hammered by storm surge from Hurricane Helene. And then, of course, you would see the tremendous amount of storm surge that would be coming right into Tampa Bay based on this. If that eye of that hurricane goes over that little peninsula there, Pinellas County there, that's where Clearwater and St. Pete is, that is going to force a tremendous amount of water into the Tampa metro area and the surrounding suburbs that are all around Tampa Bay. And that's a little bit weaker than what the earlier the HWRF model was showing. And the HWRF had a little bit of a farther north landfall there, just north of Tampa. But unfortunately, that would still be more of an onshore flow for Tampa Bay and the surrounding suburbs, and it wouldn't would also deal with Sarasota, and then getting down toward Fort Myers as well. You would have some serious storm surge coming in. And of course, storm surge flooding is the deadliest of all of the factors when it comes to hurricanes. Now, the HMON is also indicating a very strong hurricane at landfall. It grazes that northern part of the Yucatan Peninsula. And then as we stop it here at the very end, we'll go ahead and let it run one more time. And you can see how the hurricane wind field is really starting to advance. And there's where we're going to stop it there. And this is showing winds at about 114 knots, which is, again, a Category 3 hurricane. And the landfall is just a little bit farther north, kind of in between the HWRF and the HAFS model. The HWRF was about right here. The HAFS model was down here. And this is putting a landfall kind of in between. Unfortunately, that would be horrible for the Tampa Bay area and the surrounding suburbs, and of course some of the bigger cities that are a little bit farther down toward the south as well. But it would also impact areas that would have already been hit by Hurricane Helene. There's probably a lot of loose branches, maybe some damage that hasn't been repaired. There's a lot of debris that's probably laying at the streets in many of these towns and cities. So having another Category 3 or 4 hurricane barrel through in a couple of weeks' time is going to be something significant. So this is really something we're going to be watching. We are very fortunate here in South Louisiana. I know Francine was rough for some folks down in southeastern parts of Louisiana, but that cannot compare to what we saw with Hurricane Helene and what we could possibly see with Hurricane Milton. Now, there are a couple of things to watch, and one of them is the wind shear. It has been in a low wind shear environment, and it's going to stay in a low wind shear environment for at least another day. So strengthening is possible if those winds get up to 165 miles per hour. According to my colleague, Philip Klotzbach, who's the leader of that Colorado State University team that does the early season forecast, if it reaches maximum intensity of 165 miles per hour, it would be the strongest Gulf of Mexico hurricane ever in the satellite era, which means from 1966 on until today. So there's a lot of records that seem to be going down with this particular thing. And as we look at the wind shear going into Wednesday afternoon, early evening, you can still see that there's low wind shear kind of on the southern side of this, but it starts to get impacted by this trough. Not only is this trough going to help to turn it more toward the northeast, but it would also bring some wind shear on the western side of that. So the forecast is a little bit of weakening before landfall, but it still looks like it's going to be an impactful hurricane with winds of at least Category 3 strength. Water temperatures are there, although there has been a little bit of cooling right along the coast. What I would really hope for is they get a Hurricane Lily kind of an effect like what we saw back in 2002 when Lily was a Cat 4 out in the middle part of the Gulf of Mexico and then weakened rapidly due to wind shear and some colder waters. And remember, Hurricane Lily was an early October system as well. But I don't know if it's going to be enough because even the tropical cyclone heat potential from earlier this week still is indicating some premium fuel between where the hurricane is now and where it wants to go. Did also want to show you that we still have Hurricane Leslie that is out in the middle part of the Atlantic Ocean. It's right here. And we also had another hurricane, and for some reason the name is slipping my mind. Kirk, that's the one. Kirk is the one that's up to the north. It is now a non-tropical low pressure area as it moves off into the northern Atlantic. So the tropical weather outlook again is showing 2 hurricanes that are currently running. Yesterday we had 3. And if I'm correct, that's the only time we've had 3 ongoing hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin during the month of October. So that's something to say there. And you look at some of those early season forecasts, even though we haven't gotten the number of named storms that were earlier forecast, we're only on, I think, the 13th named storm here, 12th or 13th named storm. But when you accumulate all of the hurricane days and major hurricane days, they have what's called the ACE value, the accumulated activity over the course of the season. We are now already starting to get higher than some of the averages and now starting to approach some of those forecasts that we saw during the early part of the hurricane season. And as I said, when August was just so quiet, one of the things I wondered is, well, is September going to be August and is October going to be more like September? And it seems like we're starting to get that way. And I don't know if we're really out of the woods yet. So the Global Tropical Hazards Outlook is going to be released again tomorrow afternoon. I'll have it on Wednesday for you because it comes after we do Let's Talk Tropics. But the GFS is indicating maybe some development down in this particular area about October 16th, October 17th. So not quite out of the woods yet. And as you can see, the frequency continues to stay with us all the way through the mid part of November or October. And then it starts to drop off, excuse me, a little bit more as we head into the early part of November. So hurricane season doesn't end until November the 30th, although here in Louisiana, usually by the time we get halfway through October, we can start to breathe a sigh of relief as most tropical systems do curve a little bit farther toward the east. So that is what sorry about that. That's what I've got for you right now. If you like Let's Talk Tropics, please like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also turn on those notifications. And in between updates, if you can, follow along on my social media pages. I'm doing my best to keep up as well. And we'll have another update on Hurricane Milton's position, wind speed, and pressure coming up at 1 o'clock a little bit later on this afternoon. And a new cone and forecast will come out at 4 o'clock this afternoon. I'm meteorologist Dave Baker. Enjoy the rest of your Monday, and I'll talk to you for Acadiana weather today at 7:30 on Tuesday. See you then.